There is a woman who lives in London. She works in an open-plan office with 63 people. She goes to the gym 3 times a week. She has 411 friends on Facebook, 219 followers on Instagram, and a WhatsApp group for every area of her life. She has not had a single conversation in the past 3 months that made her feel genuinely known. Not one. She does not know how to explain this to anyone because from the outside, her life looks full. She is supposed to be connected. She has all the things that are meant to prevent loneliness. And yet, every evening she closes her front door, sits in the quiet of her flat, and feels a particular kind of emptiness that she has no name for and no one to tell. She is not alone in this. In fact, she is part of the fastest growing public health crisis in the modern world, and almost nobody is talking about it honestly. Loneliness is not the same as being alone. That is the first and most important thing to understand. You can be completely alone and feel no loneliness at all. And you can be surrounded by people, colleagues, friends, a partner, a family, and feel it more acutely than you have ever felt anything. Loneliness is a psychological state, and according to research, it is now one of the most dangerous ones a human being can inhabit. In this video, we are going to break down what loneliness actually is at the neurological level, why modern life has created the conditions for a loneliness epidemic, what it does to the brain and body when it goes untreated, and most importantly, what the science says about how to genuinely move through it. This is not a video about being sad. It is a video about one of the most misunderstood experiences of modern human life. Let's get into it. The most comprehensive scientific work on loneliness was conducted by social neuroscientist John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago. Cacioppo spent over 2 decades studying loneliness not as an emotional state, but as a biological signal. What he found transformed the field. Loneliness, Cacioppo discovered, is not simply the absence of company. It is the perceived discrepancy between the social connections you have and the social connections you need. It is entirely subjective. 2 people in identical social situations can experience completely different levels of loneliness because what matters is not the quantity of connection, it is the quality. The sense of being genuinely known, genuinely mattering to at least one other person. And here's the part that changes everything. Cacioppo's research confirmed that chronic loneliness is not merely an emotional discomfort, it is a physiological threat response. When the brain perceives social isolation real or perceived, it activates the same neural threat pathways as physical danger. The stress hormones cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. The immune system shifts into a defensive, inflammatory state. The brain's threat detection becomes hypersensitive, scanning the social environment for rejection and danger the same way a body scans a dark alley for physical threat. This is evolutionary. For our ancestors, being cut off from the group meant death. Loneliness was the brain's alarm system designed to motivate reconnection before isolation became fatal. The problem is that alarm system has not updated for modern life. It still fires at the same intensity in a world where most loneliness is not a physical survival threat, but a chronic, low-level, invisible one. And a chronic alarm that never switches off does not protect you, it destroys you. So what does this loneliness epidemic actually look like in modern life? Because it rarely looks the way people imagine it. You might recognize it in the person who is always available, always the one who organizes, who replies first, who shows up, who stays constantly busy and socially present, because the moment things go quiet, the emptiness rushes in. Busyness, for chronically lonely people, is often not ambition. It is anesthetic. You might recognize it in the person who has dozens of friendships but no intimacy. Relationships that live entirely on the surface, full of shared activities, humor, small talk, but where nothing real is ever said, where vulnerability would feel dangerous, where the friendship would fracture if you brought your actual self to it. These are connections without depth. And connection without depth does not satisfy loneliness, it just decorates it. You might recognize it in the scrolling, the 45 minutes on Instagram at midnight that leave you feeling worse than before you opened the app. Research by psychologist Sherry Turkle at MIT found that passive social media consumption, watching others' lives without genuine interaction, measurably increases feelings of loneliness and social comparison. We built tools for connection that, used passively, produce the opposite. Or you might recognize it in the particular loneliness of the relationship 2 people sharing a home, a bed, a life, and a distance between them that neither has the language to name or the courage to cross. This is what the loneliness epidemic looks like in 2025. Not elderly people sitting alone in empty houses. Ordinary people, surrounded by ordinary life, starving quietly for something they cannot quite name. Here is the part of this conversation that almost never makes it into mainstream media, and it is the most urgent part of all. The physical consequences of chronic loneliness are devastating, and they are backed by some of the most rigorous epidemiological research of the last 2 decades. In 2015, a landmark meta-analysis by Julianne Holt-Lundstad at Brigham Young University analyzed data from over 3 million people across 70 studies. Her finding was stark. Chronic loneliness increases the risk of premature death by 26%. Social isolation increases it by 29%. For context that is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, it exceeds the mortality risk of obesity. Loneliness does not just hurt, it kills. The mechanisms are well understood. Chronic activation of the stress response accelerates cardiovascular disease, suppresses immune function, disrupts sleep, and accelerates cognitive decline. A 2019 study found that lonely individuals showed measurably faster progression of dementia symptoms. Cacioppo's research found that loneliness dysregulates the body's inflammatory response, leaving chronically lonely people in a state of constant, low-grade biological alert. And here is the most insidious part. Loneliness, left unaddressed, becomes self-perpetuating. Cacioppo identified what he called the loneliness loop. Chronic loneliness makes the brain's threat detection hypersensitive to social rejection. You begin to see social danger where none exists to interpret neutral interactions as hostile, to withdraw before you can be rejected, to avoid the very connections that would relieve the pain. Loneliness rewires the brain to protect itself in ways that guarantee it deepens. This is why telling a lonely person to simply put themselves out there is not just unhelpful. It fundamentally misunderstands the neuroscience of what chronic loneliness does to the brain. Here is the reframe that changes the entire conversation. We have been treating loneliness as a personal failure, as a sign that something is wrong with the person experiencing it, that they are not trying hard enough, not social enough, not likable enough, not enough. But loneliness is not a personal failure. It is a public one. The UK appointed a Minister for Loneliness in 2018, the first in the world, because the data made it impossible to pretend this was an individual problem anymore. The United States Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic in 2023. These are not personal failures being recognized by governments. They are structural failures. We have built a world that is physically connected and emotionally isolated. We have replaced depth with volume, presence with performance, conversation with content. The loneliness epidemic is not happening to weak or broken people. It is happening to ordinary people inside a system that was never designed to meet the one need that defines us as a species: the need to be genuinely known by another human being. You were not designed to live the way modern life asks you to live. Your loneliness is not a flaw. It is a protest. Here is what the science actually recommends, because the answer to loneliness is more specific than most people think. Number 1. Prioritize depth over frequency. Research consistently shows that one genuinely intimate conversation where something real is said, something vulnerable is shared, does more to relieve loneliness than a week of surface-level social contact. You do not need more plans. You need one conversation where you say something true. This week, identify one person you trust and tell them something you have not told anyone. Not a crisis, not a confession, just something real. Something that lets them see you slightly more clearly than they did before. That is the unit of antidote to loneliness. Not an event, a moment of genuine disclosure. Number 2, replace passive consumption with active contact. Every time you find yourself scrolling through other people's lives, stop. Send one message instead, not a reaction. A message with a question, a memory, a real thought. One intentional reach is worth 3 hours of passive watching, always. Number 3, lower the bar for what counts as connection. One of the most robust findings in loneliness research from Dr. Nicholas Christakis at Yale is that weak ties matter enormously. The barista who remembers your order, the neighbor you say good morning to, the colleague you ask a genuine question of. These micro-connections are not a substitute for intimacy, but they are not nothing. They are a daily reminder that you exist in relation to other people. And for a brain fighting loneliness, that signal matters more than we have ever given it credit for. Loneliness is the most common human experience that almost no one admits to. We perform connection constantly on our screens, in our social lives, in the stories we tell about how full our lives are. But behind that performance for so many people is a quiet that no amount of noise quite fills. If this video describes something, you have felt something you have not quite had the words for. Until now, I want you to do one thing. Comment below, just one word. Tell me where you are watching this, from your city, your country, wherever you are right now. Because I want you to see something. I want you to see how many people in how many places watch this video, feel exactly what you feel, and never say a word about it to anyone. You are not the only one, not even close. Subscribe, and next week, we are going into something that connects directly to everything we talked about today. The psychology of self-sabotage, why you push away the very things and people that could end the loneliness, why good things feel dangerous, and what you can do about it. See you then.